I'm Jenny Carlson.
I'm Barry Trammell. Welcome to the Jenni and Berry Show.
Fans storming the court or rushing the field, that's been happening for decades. There's actually a photo from 1940 of fans going after the goalpost at the end of the Harvard Army football game.
But a recent spate of scary incidences have brought court stormings into the headlines. Caitlin Clark got knocked down, and Duke big man Kylie Phillipsko injured his leg. What can be done about fans storming the court?
Before we get to any of that, we want to say thanks to these sponsors for supporting the Jenni and Berry Show. MidFirst Bank, Next Gen Roofing, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, 988, Oklahoma's Mental Health Lifeline. Drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. And hey, let's face it, a box of pizza and a case of beer just don't work like they used to. Nobody wants to help you move. We know two fellas who love moving. At Two Fellas Moving Company, we offer free, no-strings quotes for your move. With more than 20 years experience, we've pretty much moved it all. Our services don't end up moving either. Need to do some remodeling or spring cleaning? We've got you covered with dumpster rentals and junk haul services. Remember, quotes are free and there are no strings attached. If you're moving in Oklahoma, make sure to call the fellas. Visit twofellas.com for your free quote today. Barry, court storming, field storming, been around for a long, long time. But somehow the dangers seem to be growing. We saw two college stars put in scary situations. I mean, can you imagine if Caitlin Clark had been seriously injured? She got knocked down accidentally by a Ohio State fan. But I mean, something like that. We're not far from that. Those are scary type incidents.
Yeah, it's bad. Now, if someone had gotten hurt in a field storming, a court rushing, then we probably would come to a resolution. That's probably what would be the tipping point. But we're trying to avoid that. We don't want anybody seriously hurt. We don't want anybody seriously injured. So finding solutions, it's all a dilemma. You know, you've got to, it's mostly on the college level, it's mostly students that instigated or student-aged fans, and getting them to the ballpark is a chore. It's not 1964. You don't wake up on Saturday morning and say, oh, we can't wait to get to the ballpark. When you get to the ballpark, you're on your phone anyway. So it's a problem getting the younger generation to migrate and give 3 hours to an event. So you don't want to alienate those customers, particularly because they're your long-term customers. On the other hand, you can't let them, their exuberance is manifested most by rushing the court. So it's a dilemma. Don't know what to do. A lot of suggestions out there, but at the end of the day, we can't have fans rushing the court while the opposing team is still out there.
Yeah.
Recipe for disaster.
And I think there is possibly some ways that we can, explore that might help to keep those players, those coaches, those teams that are still on the court, or in the case of football, on the field. But yeah, it's a big problem, Barry, because I mean, it's multi-layered too. It's the schools, it's the conferences. I mean, obviously the schools, they want to get those students in the building because then they build those long-term fan tendencies. They go to games. They want to be there. I mean, you look at a place like Baylor, for example, that recently opened a fairly new basketball arena. They moved their students even closer to the court. They wanted to do things to make it more appealing for students to be there. So, for a long time, something like you saw at Duke, where the students line that one side of the arena and are right on the court, essentially. I think that's going to be happening more as schools try to find ways to draw in students. So then you've got the students that are likely to go onto the court even closer to the court. So, the schools are sort of part of this. The TV is part of this. They show it. They're not afraid to show it. Should they show it? Should they, shy away from it? Those are questions. Social media. There's all sorts of layers to this. But yeah, when you've got players put in peril, it definitely cracks it open a whole different way. But who do we turn to, Barry, and say, all right, you got to help fix this because you helped cause it? Is it social media? Is it TV? Is it something else?
Well, no, I think I think the situation with social media is it's an instigator of this. It's an accelerant of this. Next time you see a field rushing or court storming, just do a quick count of how many of the kids have their phones out filming it. Well over half. It might be 90%. So that's part of the fuel. I guess you could pass a rule that says no, you can't bring your cell phones into the game, and then we would have a mausoleum for the stadium. So you can't fight the social media phenomenon. I actually think television has been okay at this. I think television has not, in the way that some knucklehead runs out on the field at the Super Bowl. All the TV people for decades really have agreed we're not going to show the guy. We're not going to give him, his moment in the sun. And I think that has cut down on it. You can't do that with field rushing. That's part of the story. Yeah. There's 70,000 people there that see the field being stormed. You see it coming. It's part of the story. Television's done okay with that. I just think there are steps that need to be considered. And I think it needs to be sort of a collective consciousness. We can talk about some of these things here in a minute, about the solutions. People have thrown out some things. Let me throw it out. Let me throw some out, Jacko. You tell me how you feel. The SEC has been doing this. They've sort of been the leader of this, and that's some heavy fines. Yeah. They've gone from, I think, 50,000 to 100,000, 200,000. Now they're into the deal of if LSU rushes the field and Alabama's the opponent, LSU's got to write a check to Alabama.
Yeah.
How do you feel about fines?
Well, I don't think it's stopping anything. I think it's still going to happen if you've got fines. But I mean, I think it probably does pain people at those SEC schools when they have to write out checks to an opposing athletic department. But, if you've got students involved, they're probably not the ones writing the checks to then have to write the check. A lot of that money's coming from boosters and donors who are probably staying in their seats, or probably staying in their boxes, their suites, whatever they are in at the game. They're not the ones rushing the court, but they're the ones ultimately going to foot the bill because that's going to come out of the athletic department coffers. Fines are, I think it's probably a good idea, but I don't necessarily think it's stopping anything. It hasn't to this point. No. Now, maybe if you got big fines in a conference that is a little bit lower status where money's a little tighter, perhaps, but I don't think it's doing much.
No, I don't either. You're right. It hasn't shown a propensity to discourage any of that activity. Some people have suggested forfeits. How do you feel about forfeits? LSU rushes the field against Alabama after a big win. Alabama's proclaimed the winner. What do you think?
That would get people's attention, don't you think? That's the type of punishment that people would sit up and take notice in. But then you've got to ask the question, well, what happens if somebody from the other school gets, a wild hair to put on some LSU stuff and run onto the field? Does that become, like they're sort of trying to game the system and get their team a win? I don't know that you can do a forfeit situation. That seems really dicey. Some problems could arise, but that would be something that I think most fans would get their attention, Barry.
Yeah, I don't like it for this reason. I think you've cut off you cut off your arm and killed yourself. Here's the deal: people want to watch sports and know that what they're watching is true. If you tell somebody at the end of a game, "Hey, we're pretty sure this is the results, but we'll let you know later." The Indy 500 from, I think it was 1981. I can't really remember, but settled 6 months, 9 months later. Games that are determined hours later. We've had some of the Olympic competition has gone into protests and all of that. That is a killer to the fan. The fan will walk away and say, "I'll find something else." You've got to be able to trust the results you see on the field. So I don't like forfeits. Now, here's one I find interesting because you're dealing with students. Academic suspension. You run out on the field, you're suspended the rest of the semester or for whatever indeterminate situation. You don't get everybody. You don't get most people. You could get some people.
Yeah.
How do you feel about academic suspension?
It's an interesting thought, but yeah, the question of how do you enforce and who gets it and who doesn't. I mean, the thing about field storming and court storming that I start to think about too, Barry, and we've seen this happen. There are times when if it starts to happen, even if you don't want to do it, you have to do it for your own safety or you're going to get run over. I mean, actually run over to get to say, okay, I'm not moving. Well, then all of a sudden you put yourself in danger. So if you're in a situation where you'd say, I don't want to do this, I want to stay in my seat, but 1,000, 2,000 people behind you decide otherwise, you're going. It doesn't matter. So I think that, yes, there is I think that could be something that would get students' attention. But I know that these injuries are bad, but I think fans having a chance to celebrate should not be completely squashed. I think there have to be other ways to do this that don't involve completely taking field storming and court storming out of the equation. I don't know if I have the how this is done, but I do think you mentioned the SEC earlier. I think the SEC has decided instead of trying to stop the court storming or the field storming, which again, something else we haven't talked about, a lot of the people that are trying to do the stopping of this are probably hourly wage earners who are security in these facilities. They're not getting paid much. And to ask them to try to hold back tens of thousands of students coming on the field or the court, I don't think that's a good idea either. What the SEC has decided to do with its resources is focus on getting the teams, the visiting team, players, coaches off the field, off the court. That's where they focus their resources, their people, create a corridor, send people out to get the players and coaches and get them off the field and off the court. And to me, that seems like a much better use of resources because, again, all of these things seem like at some level they would stop it, but I don't know if it totally gets stopped, even with some really punitive actions.
Yeah, no, that's clearly the desire is get the opponents off. I think a lot of schools have been in direct conflict with that theory, though, when they do things like move the student section behind the opponent's bench.
Yeah.
I was watching, you mentioned Baylor, I was watching OSU Texas basketball and Texas students right behind the OSU bench. So, I mean, they weren't going to storm the court in Austin on Saturday, but if that had been Kansas, if that had been Houston or somebody and the Horns beat them in Austin, you can see where that kind of thing could happen. So
Sure.
Schools have to be culpable of that. If you want to make sure the opponent can get off quickly, you get the students somewhere else, get them on the far end, the other side, whatever the case may be. So, I think about this court storming, field rushing. It's in the 70s. It was really funny. It happened in all kinds of ways. Hank Aaron hits home run number 715.
Yeah.
And two guys end up running around the bases with him, two just knuckleheads from Georgia. Then Chris Chambliss, I think, famously hit that home run in the American League playoffs of, I think it was 77, and to beat Kansas City, and he literally never got around the bases. I mean, the Yankee fans were everywhere. I think it was 77. In 1978, when the Yankees cinched, I think this was in the World Series, they got a nice lead and going into the ninth inning, all of a sudden, out on the field came mounted horsemen and police dogs that were not puppies, if you know what I mean. And to me, that was sort of the genesis of the end of professional field storming. We've had some, but we haven't had a lot. It's mostly been on the college level. The pros got serious about it.
Yeah.
Now, the pros don't have students. It's more and more people of means that go to games because of the ticket prices. So it's not anybody that's always terribly invested in the situation. But from 1978 on, the major leagues, football, basketball, baseball, They're not rushing the field. So I always thought those mounted horsemen were a striking symbol of keeping things sort of in place. Georgia has the hedges. I wonder if you just go out and put up an electric fence. Just somebody wants to do that fence, have at it. Just have at it.
Yeah, I don't know that those things are reasonable at the college level, some of them, but I mean, if they can do them at the pro level, I suppose they can do them at the college level if they so desired. But you're right. I mean, the thing is, a lot of these facilities you're dealing with, when you're talking about NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, a lot of these facilities have got similar construction in terms of what's needed. They need this much space on the sidelines, this much on the around the court, how this is done. So I think it's a little bit different because you can be a little bit more similar in how you enact some of these things, but college level, everywhere is different. I mean, like you said, some of these places are putting students right behind visiting benches. Some of them aren't. I was at Kansas for the football game when OU was there this last year, and they stormed the field after beating the Sooners. And I didn't think about it much at the time, but we're talking about placement of student sections and whatnot. The student section at Kansas is at the end that's away from where the visitors have to exit. So the visiting fans are actually sitting in the section that is right where the visiting team has to leave. So in the instance of how Oklahoma got off the field, they were actually in the portion of the field that had the least amount of fans on the field. Now there were some, and they grew in number as the field storming continued. But the way that Oklahoma was able to get off the field, if players that lingered, players that were slow, yes, they tended to encounter maybe some fans that wanted to come and heckle and those sorts of things. But for the most part, they could leave the field, and a vast majority of the team was off the field before anything, or anyone kind of got to that end of the field. So I think that the way that schools have to think about getting opposing teams off the field, off the court, that has got to continue to evolve, because I think a lot of things could be done to discourage court storming, but I think it's still going to happen, even in places that may have some pretty hard and fast rules. I just think it's become a part of the fabric of things. Well, and like I said before, there's pictures from 1940 of fans going after goalposts. So it's not become part of the fabric. It is part of the fabric. And I don't really know if rules and much can make it go away entirely.
I have actually read of an idea that might work. I think someone in the Athletic had the idea, and I thought it had a chance. Let me ask you, Jacko, can you name a place that rushes the field? The students storm the field at every single home football game.
No, I can't. I know that Baylor students run across the field.
The Baylor Bears. They run across the field. It looks like the Oklahoma land run. Somebody shot the shotgun at noon on April 22nd, and away they go. Now, You're right. They don't actually stop in Homestead. They go all the way to the other end and go get into their seats in the student section. But it's an organized field rushing at Baylor every single game before the game.
Right.
What we need is a very organized and inspired school to organize a post-game field rushing. And literally do a deal like Alabama, or let's stay with the theme. LSU beats Alabama.
Yeah.
That's a terrible. You're not going to get the Cajuns to organize. Let's do somebody. Let's do Wisconsin beats Ohio State. Wisconsin beats Ohio State. And you've practiced this, and you've drilled it into your students, and you've got the message out via social media. We're not rushing the field this Saturday when we beat Ohio State until it's time. And here's what we're going to do. When Ohio State goes down and the clock goes to 0, the Badger students start chanting 60, 59, 58, and they literally count down from 60 or 100, whatever you want to, how many beers, bottle of beers on the wall you want. and you chant down, and the whole crowd joins in, and you make it a festival of celebrating beating Ohio State, and you count it down to 0, and then you rush the field. The Wisconsin players will still be there. You've given the Buckeyes enough time to get off the field. If they're not there, if they're still there, that's on them.
Yeah.
And it would take some coordination, but all of the crimes of social media, here's one where social media can help. You can get people better organized.
Yeah.
That's the best idea I've heard. Help turn it into a more organized celebration, and it would be a really cool thing. I don't know if that would work, but it's the best I've heard.
Well, it's definitely worth considering. And, we've seen some instances where fields and courts have been rushed early. We saw the Baylor students, speaking of, a couple years back when OU was there.
Sure enough, that's right.
They ran onto the field and they had to go back because there was still time left on the clock.
Lincoln Riley, not happy. He was not happy.
Definitely not. Not happy for a lot of reasons. But yeah, I think that, it's not the tradition, but there's a lot about this tradition that I think people want to keep. They want to allow the excitement and the fun and all of that. But there's a lot about this that has to be taken into consideration. And frankly, Oklahoma State is one of the few places that football wise that the field storming actually takes some time because of the wall that goes from the stands to the field. So it actually slows down the field storming, but it also adds an element of danger for the fans to try to get down that wall. So but again, because you've got so many different variations of how stadiums are built, what they look like, there's no good way to do it. But I think it's an interesting proposal to have it be a more organized court storming or field storming, as long as everybody gets behind it and doesn't start pushing. That's the problem. To me, yes, there's a safety issue for the players and teams on the field. But when you start having thousands of students that decide it's time to go, that to me becomes a safety issue as well. So I think, yes, you got to think about who's on the field and on the court, but you got to also think about who's in the stands and what safety has to be taken into consideration there.
Let me ask you, when you were an undergrad student at the University of Kansas, a superb university of academic excellence, did you ever rush the court?
No.
Did you ever? No. I assume you didn't rush the football field either. Okay. Have you ever been caught in a field rushing while you were doing reporting duties?
Well, yes. I was at that Kansas game when they rushed the field,
right.
But I had the sense to get away from the student section when I realized what was about to happen.
And in Stillwater, how about Stillwater? The 2 or 3 times we've seen at Boone Pickens Stadium, have you been involved in any of those?
Well, I think this, and other people may not, though, is that the media is not allowed onto the field, the writing media, the print media, until the game is over. So the field storming is generally happening in progress once we're able to get on the field. But having tried to get through all the fans, I don't know if that makes me part of a field storming at OSU, but I have tried to wade across the people, and it's not a lot of fun, I'll be honest with you.
Well, I've been involved in 2. One was in 1997 at Owen Field. Sooners were not very good. They played Syracuse, and they got a lead. That's back when Syracuse was a really good program. Donovan McNabb was the quarterback. It was if the Sooners could pull the upset, it would be a monumental win. OU led 36-34 late in the game. Last play of the game, Syracuse sets up for a game-winning field goal. Sooners block it and get a great victory. And I was on the sidelines back. I don't go to the sidelines anymore until the game's over, but I was on the sidelines in the last couple of minutes of the game. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Oh, you just won the game with a blocked field goal. And then I started rushing the field, but it's not because I was moving my legs. I was being moved by the mass of humanity. And it was a incredibly scary feeling.
Yeah.
Because I realized I'm not in control here. I am not making myself move, and I am moving.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's really no room to go to the ground. But if somehow I went to the ground or anybody else, that would be very, very bad.
Yep.
So 3 years later, Sooners beat Nebraska in the game of the century. Well, it was first year of the century. So it was the game of the century.
Yeah.
1 versus 2. Oh, you're in Nebraska. And I had my wits about me. I said, I'm not getting on the field. They can rush without me. So I get down there near the bottom of the south end zone in the bleachers, and people are rushing the field, and they're trying to take the goalpost down. And all of a sudden, my eyes get watery, and my nose starts itching, and I'm having to just do like this with my eyes. I can't even keep my eyes open. Mm-hmm. And I realized, well, they've been pepper sprayed. There's pepper spray all over this air. And I thought, I don't know what's worse, that Syracuse wave or this pepper spray. So it's a very dangerous thing. Yeah. It's a very dangerous thing. We've got to find a solution.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll keep monitoring it. We know that there's a lot of talk about this, and maybe we'll talk about it again sometime. But that's all the time we've got this week. You can find our columns, videos, and podcasts at selloutcrowd.com, as well as barrytrammell.com and jenny-carlson.com. If you want our content sent straight to your inbox, sign up for our newsletters. It's free and easy. Just head to selloutcrowd.com and opt in. If this happens to be your first time hearing or watching us, be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.